I'm back. So this is going to be starting a part 2. Like I said in the last one, it was starting to take a little bit longer than what I had originally planned for. Hit a few snags, whatever you want to call it, but essentially a recap of where we left off and a little bit of an update. So in the last one, got all the bushings out and installed the Condor subframe bushings. I did get the trailing arm bushings out, however, I tried to make my own tool to get the new ones in, the Synchro Design Works monoball aluminum bushings. As you can see, it's only about half of the way in. I ended up like snapping a few bolts or just like tearing the threading off of them. They're a bit hard to get in by themselves. They are a very machine tight fit, so I'm gonna have to get like either a bushing press or rent the tool from Condor themselves that will push these guys in. But I got those in at least half of the way. I have the subframe bushings in, so it's now time to do the reinforcement stuff on the chassis itself. Alright, so like I said, it's time to start doing the welding. As you can see, I've ground a little bit. Let's see if it'll focus. I think that's about as good as a focus as I can get. As you can see, I ground the undercoating off and a bit of the paint that they had on there, a little primer stuff. So it's now time to get the new plates up. So there's a trick to do with the front ones, and that's use the actual mount bolt. Just sandwich the bolt, or sandwich the plate in between the chassis and the bolt itself. Seeing how there's a little lip there. The back is essentially just sort of like hold it in place and make sure that it's not going to interfere with the bolt hole. Probably going to clean these up just a tiny bit more. Make sure that I've got a surface that I can actually adhere or weld to. And then after that, we should be able to get the subframe back up. And just like that, got them all welded up. Essentially, I just used the, that's not going to focus. Anyway, essentially I just used the holes that provided by Condor to kind of like spot weld them in place. One thing to note is like you do need to like clear quite a bit away, just because a lot of this stuff underneath is like weatherproofing, and it's a lot of rubber, which can keep you from getting like a good weld. If you don't know how to weld, what I would suggest, if you don't know how to weld, or you don't have a welder or whatever, don't have a place to weld, what I would recommend is finding a shop that will do something like this. You will have to pay quite a bit getting the subframe down, because that is a bit of a task, but the end result is worth it. If you don't have the money to do either buy a welder or have someone else weld them in place, what I've seen other people do is use like an epoxy type deal. Essentially do the same thing, clear it all the way down to bare metal, clean up the plates themselves, and then use a 2-part epoxy on them and let them sit for let them completely cure, and it'll do a similar job. I see a lot of people do that. Some people say it's even better because it gets more surface area, but at the end of the day, welding is when you attach metal to metal via welding. That plate's not going to go anywhere anymore unless you completely like drill out those spot welds. So welding is, I would say, better. However, the 2-part epoxy will work just fine. When you're done with that, like how I am, make sure you get a coat of paint on there. to prevent rust. Any moisture that'll get in there will rust it, and it'll have the same issues as if those plates weren't there and the subframe itself, or the chassis itself, cracked. So make sure that you get a good amount of paint on there and let that dry before you're putting it on there. Make sure you do ground everything down. It does need a flat surface, though, especially if you're using something like the Condor bushings, or like the polyurethane bushings that I think it's Garage-tastic or something like that sells. Those do need a flat surface to mount to. So just make sure that everything is nice and clear, and then you should be good to go. So I'm going to get a coat of paint on these, and then hopefully I'll be able to get a hold of a bushing press, either the Condor one or just like a generic ball joint press, to get the trailing arm bushings in, and then we should be able to get this guy up in the car. Alright, so it is time to finish up the trailing arm bushings. Like I said before, I tried with a few smaller bolts to try and make my own tool. However, with it being aluminum on, or at least metal to metal, the bushings don't quite go in as easily as a regular press and style bushing would go. So normally you do need a special tool. Condor has one, Syncro has one, that are specifically designed for the trailing arms on an E36, E46 and such. What I'm going to try to use is a heavy duty ball joint press. And honestly, if this can't get it to push in, then I may have done something wrong on installation and have to figure out a way to get it out and reinstall it the proper way. But yeah, this should do the job. This shouldn't strip out. This shouldn't snap any bolt head. So we're gonna go ahead and get this attempted to get pressed in, and then go from there. Alright, good news. So the big ass ball joint press worked like a charm. Bushing 1, bushing 2. Little pro tip when doing this: one, start off with the proper tools, so you can get this to go in quite smoothly. The second one went in a lot smoother because of such, essentially. So get the proper tool, and 2, for any metal on metal bushings such as these, it's a good idea to put the bushings in the freezer until like the metal itself is sort of like, essentially what it does is it helps the metal sort of like shrink down ever so much, so when it comes time to press them in, they go in a lot smoother. The second bushing went in so much smoother because of how cold it was when getting pressed in, whereas the first one, I had attempted to freeze and then try to push in with smaller bolts, and ended up snapping the bolts halfway, pushing the bushing in. So it was a lot harder, but it still went in. Second, use just a tiny little bit of grease. This will help. Not like these bushings will ever come out ever again. In fact, I don't actually think there's a way for them to come out because of the way that they're shaped. But whenever it comes time, if like you were to do a regular bushing, or like if you're just doing the trailer arm bushing, they come out a lot easier when the metal surfaces aren't rusted together. So make sure that you get some sort of grease on there to keep the moisture from rusting the two metals together. Other than that, everything is ready to go back in. And then once everything's in, it should feel like a brand new car. So we're gonna get that going, and then the only thing left is to swap the motor. So we're gonna do that. Alright, so that was frustrating as all be it, getting the subframe back on the car, that is. Ran into an issue with the Condor bushings, or at least the front ones. The back ones didn't have the problem because essentially the studs that hold off of the chassis to mount the front subframe bushings, because the bushings themselves, like the slide into the subframe so easily, and the little retainer on the inner retainer slides in so easily, it also slides back out very easily. I essentially, as I was jacking the subframe up onto the chassis, the stud hanging from the chassis kept pushing the little retainer piece back out through the bottom, to the point where it almost seemed like it would have been easier to just leave that out, line everything up, jack it up, and then put the sleeve in, because yeah, it's literally like every 2 pumps of the jack and you've got to take a dead blow back to them to knock them back in. But everything's back on. I just got to remount the trailing arm bushings, get the springs in, and torque the subframe bolts back down, and then everything should be good to go. Can put the wheels on it, the brakes on it, yada yada yada, and work on focusing on the engine at the front of the car. So I'm gonna get everything torqued back down, and then I guess give you a little recap of that. So alright, so like I said, as frustrating as that was to get the subframe back on, everything is now hold up, there we go, focus back in. So as I was saying, like this was pretty frustrating to get the subframe back in, but it is completely back in. Got the, see if you can, somewhere over in this general area you will see that the trailing arm is back up on both sides. Everything is tightened down. The subframe I'm going to kind of like let settle for a day and then come back out here and torque it down a second time, just to make sure that everything is the way it should be. And then the only thing that is left back here is I do actually, while in the process of this, I did realize that I do need new rear brakes. So that's on the list. Get the alignment done as soon as it rolls again. And then also I do need to move it somehow to kind of like jack the car up a little bit higher so I can get the parking brake cables to go back up through the chassis, because the way it's sitting right now, there is no room to get underneath here, which makes doing anything quite difficult. Probably why it was so frustrating to get this thing back on. But like I said, it is back all together. Brakes need to be done, vertical suspension, but that's just a couple of bolts. Hold up. Remember how I told you guys a little while back that the rear suspension, like the rear shocks, were 2 different shocks? So like I've got the cheap eBay shit here, and then just some random shock. I'm noticing on the eBay stuff, there are bolts, a spare set of bolts on the shock tower. The ones that I took off are inside the car. I don't know what that's all about. Why there are 2 sets of bolts holding the shock on. Why there's one set underneath the bottom of the shock tower. But we're gonna figure that out next time on Dragon Ball Z. But yeah, I think I'm gonna call it right here. Thank you guys very much for watching. If you like what you see, please like, comment, subscribe, whatever. This is something that I do want to keep going, and obviously I'm going to keep going regardless, but would kind of like to make friends along the way with this stuff. Like I said, like, comment, subscribe, whatever you want to do with the video. But I will see you guys here next time when I do more work to this thing. So, see you later.